Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday broadcast. And again, we're going to get back into, as you might imagine, a conversation about the coronavirus and the pandemic. But I also, a little bit later, will talk about the press conference. Oh, that was interesting, wasn't it? But first of all, I thought for those of you that did not watch it or did not hear about it, I was actually hearing part of it on radio as I was heading home, and I was hearing this video that the president played, and so that's going to be important. So I thought I might mention that our third article that we've posted on the website, if you haven't had a chance to see the video, hear it, there is a link to that, because after the president played it, you, of course, started a controversy. Matter of fact, even as the video started to play, I understand that CNN and MSNBC actually cut away from that, which then called it a propaganda video. Because if you're not familiar, the video was actually one that put together a number of, if you will, what are called supercuts, in which it was, first of all, showing some individuals downplaying this, not only the president, but also some of those individuals, including MSNBC and CNN. Then, of course, showed some of the comments about how this might have been effective, for example, the travel ban, and then also then had a number of governors, in particular, ones that might have bothered some of the Democratic governors, like Governor Cuomo from New York, Governor Newsom from California. And then, of course, immediately ABC's John Carl says, why did you play that? This was like a campaign video. And a variety of other issues. So if you have not seen the video, so that you can kind of get ahead of the issue, you can go and find the article. There's a link to it, and you can watch it, and we'll get to that a little bit later. It led to a press conference that was about one of the most contentious ones I've seen for some time, primarily not just between ABC News and the president, but also CBS reporter and the president. For those of us that are older, it reminds us of some of the contentious back and forth between, say, I don't know, you'd have to go all the way back to Dan Rather and Richard Nixon during the height of Watergate, or maybe a few of the contentious times under George W. Bush. But that is what oftentimes happens with a Republican president, and sometimes the way Republicans have dealt with it. Ronald Reagan just simply said, I'm just going to ignore them. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make sure that the helicopter blades are going around on Marine One. So as I walk out of the White House, the only way a question can be asked is if Sam Donaldson sits there and shouts it out at people. Or, of course, the way George W. Bush dealt with it was simply to not defend yourself and occasionally send out somebody that was from a press briefing doing that. That's not exactly Donald Trump's style, and so he certainly ended up probably angering every single reporter in that room. And so, anyway, we'll get to that a little bit later. But one of the first articles I posted is, I think, helpful because as we talk about this virus, there are a lot of various kinds of conspiracies out there. And I'm not going to take on so much the conspiracies as sort of what do we know about this, because it is, I think, very important to maybe set the record straight as far as we can. And you know that when the virus first came out, we read a short piece by an individual that knows China very well and pointed out, I think logically, that there might have been an attempt to develop a biological weapon, which it was not, but it could have been an accidental release from that lab But the problem with those kinds of theories was that some of the people that came down with what now we call COVID-19 were not at the lab, were not at the seafood market. And so the first article I have here is a very good piece by Fred Lucas, which would be helpful, because if you see some of these statements being made on Facebook, or you've just wondered yourself, what about these? He has 4 points, and I'll take them one at a time before we take a break and then move on to some other issues. And the first is, I think we can say with some certainty now, it's not a biological weapon. The reason for that is, if you go to some of the research done by Scripps Research, they said, quote, if someone were seeking to engineer a new coronavirus as a pathogen, they would have constructed it from a backbone of a virus known to cause illness. But the scientists found that SARS-CoV-2, which is actually the formal name of the virus, backbone differed substantially from those already known coronaviruses and mostly resembled viruses found in bats and pangolins, which we've talked about here before. The head of the Center for Infectious Disease Research Policy at the University of Minnesota put it this way: there is no evidence whatsoever that this is a bioweapon or that it was accidentally released from the Wuhan lab. I'll go back and maybe challenge part of that later, but let's take him at what he says there. And he goes on to say, today, with the genetics we have on these viruses and how we can do testing, we can almost date them almost like carbon testing. So radiocarbon, you know, is as old. And so the idea is that we can sometimes use genetic testing almost like we do carbon-14 or radiocarbon dating. So point number one, not a bioweapon. Point number two, did it even come from the seafood market in Wuhan? That used to be the idea, but David Ignatius, who writes for the Washington Post, said the prevailing wisdom that the virus was spread by people who ate contaminated animals at the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan is shaky. And so, again, we'll go to some of these professors. Richard Egbright is a Rutgers University professor of chemistry and chemical biology. He said it is absolutely clear the market had no connection with the origin of the outbreak virus and instead only was involved in the amplification of an outbreak that started elsewhere in Wuhan almost a month earlier. And so that could be the reason why we saw kind of an outbreak at the market, because you had a lot of people in close proximity. But the actual initial infection, what many people call patient zero, may have taken place somewhere else. Number three, could this have accidentally come from this? Because less than 300 yards from that seafood market is the Wuhan branch of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And so David Ignatius, again writing for the Washington Post, said researchers from that facility and the nearby Wuhan Institute of Virology have posted articles about collecting bat coronavirus from around China for studying for future to prevent future illnesses. Did one of those samples leak, or was hazardous waste deposited in a place where it could be spread? But again, what you have are, again, the professor from Rutgers said that the possibility that the virus entered humans through a laboratory accident cannot and should not be dismissed. But he says, again, there was no signatures of manipulation. And so those 3 points, the final one is simply, what about the misinformation from China? And that's very well documented. Matter of fact, later this week, I have a Viewpoints commentary coming out, giving credit where credit is due to Senator Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, who was one of the earliest members to raise alarm about what was happening in China. And, of course, even in January, we had 8 different Chinese doctors, including Li Weiliang, who warned about the coronavirus, but later was tamped down by the Chinese government and condemned for making false statements. But as we've pointed out before, the World Health Organization simply parroted much of what China was saying. And that's why the Trump administration has considered defunding the World Health Organization. So that's the first article. I think it gives you a little more balance to some of this coverage. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about the need for economists and political leaders to create an endgame to the current lockdown on our society. The obvious objection to this can be found in the numerous cliches that portray any discussion as an attempt to trade dollars for death. The governor of New York, for example, scolds, "No one should be talking about social Darwinism for the sake of the stock market." He argues we will not put a dollar figure on human life. But even the editors of the New York Times recently described this as a false choice. Shelter in place has been necessary, but there must be a time in the future when government leaders must consider the economic and humanitarian trade-offs. Reopening American society isn't as much about the stock market as it is about the everyday lives of millions of Americans. Frankly, the wealthy will probably weather the current lockdown, but that is not true of the poor and even middle class who have no savings to rely on. As I mentioned yesterday, income is a strong predictor of health outcomes. People who are poor don't live as long. Americans who have lost wages and lost jobs are less likely to prosper. They won't eat as well, and they won't buy medications because they're simply trying to buy food and pay the rent. For the purist who argues that we should never talk about trade-offs, we can point to many current examples. Fewer people would die on highways if the speed limit was 25 miles per hour. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety found that highway fatalities rose 8.5% for every increase of 5 miles an hour. Cigarette smoking is responsible for 480,000 deaths per year, and 88,000 people die each year from alcohol-related causes. But we don't ban either of these. We make policy trade-offs every day. We need a national conversation about the cost and benefit of our current lockdown. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My next article is from the Daily Caller, but I guess you have to be a member to read it, so I'll just read it to you, since it won't obviously be on the website of pointofview.net. But I thought it was very good because it was by William Davis, how the coronavirus is infecting Americans' civil liberties. And that's going to be a theme that runs through this week. It is really amazing to me how this is played out. And, of course, we've talked a little bit about some of the religious liberty issues, and I will go to a piece by Gary Bauer a little bit later that gets into that. We're going to spend some time talking about this with certainly Kelly Shackelford on Friday, but it's begun to be more and more obvious, and we will even perhaps have an article that will come out in the future in Outlook to really address some of these issues, because I love how William Davis starts this. He says, as tens of millions of Americans have been placed under quarantine due to the coronavirus pandemic, so has the U.S. Constitution. You know, and there is a sense in which people are beginning to be more and more concerned. Now, if you listen to this program, even yesterday I mentioned this, certainly last Friday I spent some more time talking about this, that in other countries, especially some of these more authoritarian leaders have used the pretext or the excuse of the coronavirus to vastly increase their power and their authority over their citizens. It isn't anywhere as bad here in the United States, although I would have to say that as we go to the national hour, I'm going to come back to this and talk about what is happening in Michigan, which, interestingly enough, is due in large part to the fact that I think, as now we even have some people talking about this, that the governor of Michigan is really kind of campaigning to be the vice presidential nominee with Joe Biden. And I'm not the only one to point that out. As a matter of fact, one of the quotes I'm going to give you in just a minute comes from an individual in Michigan saying the very same thing. So let's recognize that in a couple of localities in various states or in various cities, either a governor or the mayor, or in some cases a county judge or whatever, are clamping down on some of our civil liberties. And, of course, it's very reminiscent of a famous phrase by Benjamin Franklin, who said, "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And, of course, the idea here is that we have to give up some of our liberty. We have to shelter in place, and we have to close down lots of businesses in order to keep people safe. We understand that. But then, in an effort to really close down some of these states or cities, we have people going much further. Here's just a few examples from this article. The Democratic Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear warned people in his state that he would have police take pictures of their license plates and force them to quarantine for 14 days if they attended Easter services. We did talk about that briefly yesterday. Fortunately, we have some courts here, and U.S. District Court Judge Justin Walker later issued a ruling making clear that drive-through services must be allowed in the state. In Mississippi, you have the attempt to shut down Easter services. This, of course, is where you're talking about Pastor Hamilton of the King James Bible Baptist Church. This is the particular church that Kelly Shackelford and First Liberty have been defending. But even there, you can see on the video the police officer saying that your rights have been suspended by the government. Oh, they have? Oh, that was a surprise to some of us. And, of course, Kelly Shackelford was able to get an injunction issued, and even today they're having an actual hearing before the court, and we'll talk more about that, obviously, on Friday. Let's head up to Kansas. Democratic Governor Laura Kelly forced churches to close for Easter, and the state Supreme Court upheld her decision. Of course, in New York City, you have, of course, the Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio threatened to close churches and synagogues permanently if they resisted his shutdown orders. So those are some examples of religious liberty. But, of course, this piece by William Davis is talking about civil liberties. So in some cases, we're not talking about religious liberty. We're just talking about your freedom of expression, your freedom to actually go and to, in one way or another, visit friends, go to the grocery store, watch a sunset, whatever. And again, he gives us some of those examples. A Pennsylvania woman fined $1,000 for the act of driving alone. A 12-year-old girl in Arkansas reportedly playing basketball alone before the police confiscated the hoop, which actually is happening all over the country, so that's not just there. California man attempted to take a stroll on the beach with nobody else around was, of course, chased by the police, carried away in handcuffs, and we've got lots of those kinds of stories. But probably the tip of the iceberg, the one that has gotten the greatest amount of attention, comes from Michigan. And that is where, again, Democratic Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a potential candidate for vice president, has implemented some of the strictest regulations and restrictions that we have. She's banned people from traveling within parts of the state, even prohibited people from visiting their second home. You can't go to your vacation home, although I know a number of people in California said if they had a vacation home, they've already taken off for it. Just to get away from some of the craziness that is there. An executive order that actually tells grocery stores and other stores to not allow the sale of non-essential items, and that could be, garden seeds, furniture, carpeting, flooring. Of course, we have talked about some of those, even things like mosquito repellent would be considered non-essential. And so that goes to the point of Ted Goodman, who is a Republican operative from the Michigan area, and told a reporter that she is using this crisis to boost her name ID nationally at the expense of liberty and freedoms for people from Michigan. And people from Michigan are willing to make sacrifices, he said, to keep themselves and their neighbors safe. But these people from Michigan will not allow their fundamental rights to be trampled over as part of Whitmer's personal political ambitions. So this is just kind of a long and very detailed editorial, just reminding us of how not only are there concerns about the coronavirus infecting people, but it also has been infecting some of the civil liberties of individuals. And this is where our friend Gary Bauer talks about this as well, because he also reminds us that as you have the governor of Kentucky simply saying that they were going to record the license plates of anyone at an Easter gathering, and did so, and then would require them to be quarantined for 14 days. But as some people pointed out, they were also taking down the license plates of some of the people, some of the reporters in the media. Would they require them to quarantine as well? So we'll see where that is. You got one church that got creative, announcing it will hold, of course, an Easter service in a parking lot. But the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, in this particular case, went a step further and actually completely banned any gathering of any kind in church, public places, or even in homes. That's where, of course, you had Justin Walker step in, the judge, who's blasted the order as stunning and beyond all reason, and, of course, it was unconstitutional. So if nothing else, that is the case. Gary Bauer points out that in other places, Easter worshipers were hit with $500 fines. I'm hoping to see those will be nullified by some court, but nevertheless, that is the case. And Gary Bauer goes on to say, it's very revealing to see how quickly and almost enthusiastically some left-wing politicians have decided that churches and synagogues are non-essential and must be shut down, while abortion clinics, liquor stores, and lottery retailers can stay open. He says, I'm pleased to report, though, that the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney General, William Barr, warned over the weekend that the Justice Department will be taking action against local officials who violated the First Amendment. And this is perhaps an example of how thin the line is against those who want to take away our religious liberty. So those are some points that come down from William Barr, because I know our friend Gary Bauer has been in contact with them, and also our friend Kelly Shackelford has been fighting some of these cases in court. We'll give you the full kind of summary here on Friday. And I might just mention that on Friday in the noon hour, which is the hour we're broadcasting right now, we'll also have Representative Matt Krause with us by phone, because he's actually issued a letter to the governor about some things he thinks needs to take place in these areas, because not only is, of course, Matt Krause an outstanding representative in the Texas House, he also is a lawyer and also in the past has really fought some of these religious liberty cases. So we'll certainly come back to those issues in the future. When we come back from the break, though, I want to ask the question, has the lockdown worked? This is a question by Dennis Prager. And also another piece, it's still America, coronavirus or not. What about this? And maybe some of the questions about how to begin to return America back to normal. And then we'll get to that contentious press conference. Thought I'd postpone that for a while, because if nothing else, maybe you'd like to watch the video and be up to speed on what we're going to be talking about. A lot more to cover. We'll do that right after these important messages.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also give you just kind of a program note. Next hour, we're going to be talking with Natasha Bure, and that is going to be kind of fun because she is in the film Home Sweet Home. And, of course, there was original plans for this to be in the theaters May 1st. I don't think that's going to happen, but instead we found out that there will be DVD available. There will be some releases, and so in your own home you can actually watch a film that I think would be very encouraging, and an individual that actually was in, for example, the Hallmark movie, if you've seen that on your TV screen, Switched for Christmas, where she plays it with her mother, interestingly enough, and a couple other fun stories that you may have seen as well. So we'll chat with her for just a minute because we're always looking at good family affirming kinds of films, and this one is one that you'll be able to probably watch on your television set and encourage you. And then the next half hour after that, we're going to be talking with our friend Mark Hancock. He's with Trail Life USA. They're going to be doing a national backyard campout. Again, we've got to be creative. And this is a way in which you can actually go out there and be in your backyard and have a camp out. But they're going to organize this nationally so that all sorts of people, even when you're in your backyard, you can probably have a Wi-Fi connection, and you'll be able to participate in that event nationwide. So we'll talk about that with him. And then in the next hour after that, we will get back into some of these issues in the news. Let me just, if nothing else, try to answer the question that is now going to be on everybody's mind over the next couple of days and weeks, and that is, can we get back to an economy? Can we get America back on its feet? Very good letter to the president from Darrell Scott, who's been on the program with us before, and certainly is now an individual that's also a pastor and also has been part of the National Diversity Coalition for Donald Trump, as well as Tim Dunn, who's the chief executive officer for Crown Quest Operating, but also the chairman of the board for Empower Texans. Anyway, it's Let's Get America Back on Her Feet, and some creative suggestions for what the president can do. But I thought, if anything, let me give credit to a number of Democratic governors who are recognizing that the president is going to be pushing forward sometime very soon for wanting to bring the economy back, to get America back on its feet. And these Democratic governors, I think, recognize two things. Number one, the president might move too quickly. Number two, if they move, they need to have some kind of political cover. And so I think it is really, if nothing else, a little bit of political genius here, that what they have done is to actually put together a committee that will be looking at how to begin to re-implement some very simple, concrete steps to get America back on its feet. And all of these governors, whether it's Andrew Cuomo in New York or the governors of New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Delaware, they're all Democrats, but they all have recognized that they have put together a committee of these 6 northeastern states to talk about how to reopen the economy. And, of course, one of the concerns that has been raised by the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal is we might end up getting into another food fight between the president and the governors. Now, up until recently, I have appreciated the president's inclination to recognize what's called federalism. That is, there are certain powers that are delegated to the federal government, to the national government. The rest are reserved to the states and the people. And so as a result, sometimes when this president has been asked about response, he says, well, I'm glad to help the states, but it is the responsibility of the governors to address these issues within their state. Then, in getting pushed the other day, and of course this press conference probably brought out the worst in everybody, he then says, no, I can say what these governors can do, and I'm the one in charge. Well, Mr. President, not really. That sounds a lot like your previous president, who seemingly did not want to understand that there's a federal structure. And the bottom line is that there are governors right now looking at this and saying, we don't want to be rushed into this. We know what's best for our state, and that's where I agree with them. And so this, if you will, committee of 6 northeastern states put together by Andrew Cuomo might be the way to certainly begin to systematically think about what would happen in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Delaware. And they may pick up some other states in Massachusetts and who knows, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, whatever it might be. And so this, in some respects, is going to be helpful. And also, there's another part of this. The committee will, in a sense, provide a measure of political cover, because as soon as anybody takes that first step, that's back to my Viewpoints commentary yesterday, even though many of those ideas in the commentary come from people that are hardly Donald Trump supporters, you know there are going to be some people in the media that are going to actually argue that you're trading, as my commentary today talks about, dollars for deaths. And so there's going to be a need for people to say, here are some systematic, careful steps that we're going to take right now. And if that is the case, then we might be able to bring America back to its feet. What's so interesting is even though these are governors in the Northeast, we now have governors on the other side of this continent, in California, Washington, and Oregon, that said that they might also cooperate on a strategy to reopen their economies. Now, whether they'll join with the northeastern states or create their own, but I think this is political genius, because you've got to recognize that the moment any governor, even though all of these governors, the 6 in the Northeast, the 3 in the West, are all Democrats, nevertheless, they will come in for all sorts of criticism as well. And so this is going to be, I think, an interesting procedure, and so we'll have to watch how that plays out. But I wanted to give a kudos to some of these Democratic governors for trying to figure out the most effective and safest way to bring that out. And I mean safest not only in terms of safety for people that might contract the coronavirus, but safety for them, because there will be a political price to pay as soon as you begin to move away from lockdown. Which brings me to one of the other pieces I wanted to focus on here. Dennis Prager has, been saying that now we are starting to bend the curve on some of this. And so he's still asking the question, was this lockdown really necessary? And of course, the answer always is yes, because after all, if we had not locked down this country, we would have actually suffered so much more. And of course, one of the examples he loves to point to is the state of Nebraska. Now, if you have not been paying attention, there are a number of states. Used to be 10, now I think it's down to 8. It may even be less than that. But I'll pick out Nebraska for a minute, because Nebraska is one of the few states that never went into lockdown. And so, of course, this has led to all sorts of anger, because, after all, the governor there is a Republican. The Democrats have just been pillorying him back and forth and all the rest. But nevertheless, in Nebraska, interestingly enough, even though it's not locked down, it has perhaps one of the lowest death rates in the entire nation. Now, I don't think that has to do with so much lockdown as it has to do with the fact that social distancing probably already is taking place in most of Nebraska, maybe not in Omaha, but a lot of these farms are very distant from each other, but they have a death rate of less than 1 per 100,000. And so, again, you can come up with all sorts of exceptions to that. And then he also talks about this article that appeared in the Los Angeles Times, quoting from a University of California, Berkeley biostatistician, who is actually saying that actually what we have here is because California actually was locked down earlier than New York. That's why California has a much lower death rate. However, the article in the Los Angeles Times undermines its whole thesis by the next paragraph, where it points out that Florida did not impose a stay-at-home order until April 1st, and yet Florida has, again, one of the lowest death rates in the country. And interestingly enough, it's not just that. Think about this. Florida has the largest percentage of elderly people, those people over the age of 65, than any other American state. And so, again, this constant claim that lockdown has really been the answer, well, maybe it's partially one, but if you want to look even in Europe, Sweden has never shut down its restaurants and its states and all the rest. And, of course, it still has a, if you will, death rate that is comparable to the two other neighboring states, countries, you might say, of Denmark and Norway. So it's an interesting piece just to help you understand that sometimes just using a little bit of logic or a little bit of what about the other state that doesn't have lockdown? What about the other country that doesn't? You can begin to sort through some of these facts and figures and statistics, and you don't even need a medical degree to do it. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The measure of a federal judge may be what he or she writes, or maybe that a judge writes. Judge James Ho of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit never seems to miss that chance, and his opinions are worth reading. Take, for instance, his separate opinion in Horvath versus City of Leander. While he mostly agreed with the majority's decision, he raised concerns that the lower court relied upon Employment Division versus Smith, a case often relied on to curtail the First Amendment's promise of the free exercise of religion. Well, that led him to articulating the importance of words, pushing back against efforts to reduce the promise of the free exercise clause to the mere freedom of worship. Properly understood, Judge Ho helpfully explains, the founders intended the First Amendment to extend beyond mere ritual and private belief to cover any action motivated by faith. While care for the text may even mean that we shed any reluctance to hold government officials personally accountable for violating someone's religious liberty. As Judge Ho reminds us, we ought instead to be concerned about government chilling the citizens, not the other way around. After all, the Constitution is meant to restrain government, not empower it. The point for Judge Ho is that in guarding the text of the First Amendment, we refuse efforts to redefine it into lesser terms while rejecting judicial additions to it. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. You know, one of the things that the Wall Street Journal has been saying for some time, and I saw President Trump reacting to that, is they suggested, Mr. President, you'd probably be better if you shorten some of these press conferences, maybe take 2 or 3 questions, turn it over to the experts, and stop going into all the detail here. And, of course, the response from the president is, yeah, we're getting better ratings than ever. And, of course, when the president's more concerned about ratings than getting the message out, you've always got some concerns. And you do have to wonder what the ratings are going to be like for today's press conference after the, I guess I could use the word Donnybrook, but that might not make some sense, after the complete disaster that the press conference was. And it started out in large part with the president saying, here is a video I'm going to play, and almost instantaneously CNN and MSNBC cut away from that. But it was an attempt to, as I've mentioned earlier this hour, show some clips of some of the individuals doing interviews on MSNBC and CNN, some of the pundits who were downplaying the coronavirus. Because this was the attempt of the president to respond both to the New York Times article this weekend and the 60 Minutes piece on that, to say that he was downplaying it, he was not prepared, and on and on and on. And first of all, let's just acknowledge, as I think everybody should acknowledge, that there were a number of mistakes. This country and the government was not prepared, and that is due for a variety of reasons that we can maybe deal with in the future, but unfortunately that's about all the press wants to talk about these days. And so he decided that instead of doing it the way, say, George W. Bush would be, to just simply ignore, to turn a deaf eye to it, they put together a video, and it shows those clips. Then it shows, again, some other comments from one of the New York Times writers, and then also talks about how this was some of the comments made by a number of the governors from New York, New Jersey, California, a couple at Florida. And then, of course, as soon as it ends, you have ABC's John Carl saying, this looks like a campaign video. Who did this propaganda? Who produced this? And he just kept coming by. Why did you feel you needed to do that? Of course, why you feel you needed to do that has to do with everything that happened over the weekend. But if nothing else, if you have not seen the video, I'm sure the reaction will tell you what you think about the president. If you think the president has been bullied by the press and you think it's a high time for the president to fight back, then you love the video. If you instead think the president's been bullying the press and this was completely unprecedented, which it is, then you probably hated it. And we will probably see continuous response and reaction to this over the next couple of days. Because back to the issue of being unprecedented, nothing like this, I think, has ever happened before, where you have two video screens, and during a press conference, then you are subjecting the press corps, as well as everybody that's carrying this live, to the videos. And, of course, this video is going to just, have a viral nature of its own while we're talking about a virus. And so we will see where that plays itself out over the next couple of days. And I suspect we'll have a lot to talk about by Friday when Penn Extra, Kelly Shackelford, and others join us. But back to one of the issues we've been talking about here, this whole issue of trampling on our rights. Seton Motley points out that if you want to understand what could be the threat to our rights, he says, when I was going back and reading George Orwell's 1984, it didn't make sense to me, he said, because Orwell's government was extraordinarily competent in its totalitarian imposition of technological power. And he said, in reality, he says, no government in the history has ever been even remotely close to that competence level. And so he said that for George Orwell's Big Brother to really become reality, big government needed help from the private sector. And he says, enter the private sector, big tech. And so what he's making a case for is something we've talked about in this little booklet that we've made available on social media. That is the real danger to our threats, and the danger and our threat to our liberties doesn't just come from government, but it comes from big tech. And we're starting to see that now with the attempt to use, for example, cell phone data to track where people are going and all of the rest. And so I think it's kind of interesting that as we've talked about the dangers of big tech and the dangers of what is being done on social media, that may be the greatest threat. It isn't just government edicts, but it also has come in large part from individuals that have taken the time to implement some of this. But even so, police officers, law enforcement officers can handcuff a person here or there, but they can't possibly track them as well as would be provided by big tech. And so this is one of the reasons, we'll talk about this more in about a little over an hour, we are starting to see a tremendous amount of pushback. And tomorrow, we'll try to cover this as best we can, about 15,000 cars and trucks are expected to go to Michigan State Capitol to protest what they're calling Governor Gretchen Whitmer's new guidelines, tyrannical new guidelines, or their phrase, to slow the spread of the coronavirus in the state of Michigan. And as one of the organizers said, quarantine is when you restrict the movement of sick people. Tyranny is when you restrict the movement of healthy people. And so they're actually now engaging in perhaps one of the larger examples of civil disobedience. And again, let me hold up the booklet I wrote recently on civil disobedience. We're going to have perhaps the biggest example so far of civil disobedience over some of these orders, in this case happening in the state of Michigan. And so we'll see how that 15,000 cars and trucks gridlock affects the state capital of Michigan, but we'll see where that goes. And Alex Berenson, who's been on the program with us before, you might remember he was the former New York Times author who wrote about, of all things, marijuana and some of the dangers of marijuana. But now more recently, he's actually begun to say this is something we're going to have to start covering, because he says, as someone wrote me, people in Michigan know when they lose their jobs, they won't come back. And so he's now starting to also tweet and post about this, because after all, we have 16.8 million Americans that have lost their jobs in just the last 3 weeks. And so he's going to be sort of covering some of that as well. And he also points to another protest, which I was unaware of, but we'll talk about this more with our Ohio listeners, where you had a couple of dozen protesters carrying placards and wearing Guy Fawkes masks, which actually came to the state capitol building in Columbus, Ohio, in this case protesting Governor Mike DeWine, who's a Republican, and his administration. And so they were holding signs saying, "Open Ohio, quarantine is worse than the virus, social distancing or social conditioning, we do not consent." So we're starting to see a little bit of a pushback and some civil disobedience, and I'll cover more of that in the national hour from 2 o'clock to 3. But let me again, as a program note, mention that when we come back from the break, we're going to talk, first of all, about a film that probably would have been in the theaters, but now will be on your television set in a DVD, Home Sweet Home. We'll talk with Natasha Bure about that. Then we're going to talk with Mark Hancock of Trail Life USA about a national backyard campout. Talk about a few things you can do while you're still sheltering there in home. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to read some of the articles you've been quoting from over the last hour, simply go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find some of those articles very helpful, and we hope that you'll take the time to read those and maybe even post some of those and learn a little bit more about some of these issues. But let's take a break. When we come back, talk about some things to watch and maybe some things to do while we're still sheltering in place pretty much across the country. All that coming up right after this.
"2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for listening to the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and in just a few minutes we're going to be talking about some things you can do while you're still maybe sheltering in place. But let me just point out that in the next hour we're going to spend some time going through a lot of the articles that we have taken the time to post. One of those actually gets us into where did this virus originally come from. There's a lot of misinformation about that, even some conspiracy theories. So one of the articles, very good piece by Fred Lucas that appeared in the Daily Signal. We'll go through and try to answer some of those questions, some of which we were speculating on in some cases even a month ago, and so we'll get into some of that a little bit later. Also going to talk about the impact that this is having on our religious liberty and our civil liberties. A very good piece by William Davis, How the Coronavirus is Infecting America's Civil Liberties. For those of you in the state of Michigan, we'll even talk about civil disobedience. About 15,000 cars and trucks are going to descend on the capital of Michigan tomorrow because of some of the statements made and some of the orders given by your governor there. But we'll also be talking about some other things that have been happening in Kentucky and Mississippi and Kansas and a variety of other places. So we'll get into that. We'll also talk about the next hour a little bit about reopening the economy, what some governors are starting to suggest they could do, because they might be a little hesitant that the president might want to open the various gates a little too quickly. And then we'll also talk about some of the threats to our religious liberty, which don't necessarily just come from big government, but come from kind of an uneasy coalition between big government and big tech. And, of course, before the 2 hours are over, we'll spend some time talking about that press conference yesterday. The president used an unprecedented video to respond to the media, the reaction from the media, the interaction between the president and ABC News and CBS News and some others. So we'll have a lot to cover in the next hour. But I thought, let's start out without some of the controversy and just maybe say, what can we do while we find ourselves sheltered in place? And so we're going to talk about this film, Home Sweet Home, which would have been in the theaters, but now it would be an opportunity for you to watch it at home. And at the same time, we'll also, after that conversation, talk about something being proposed by Trail Life USA, a national backyard campout, which I think will be certainly something you might want to do with your children or grandchildren. But let's first of all talk about this new film coming out shortly, Home Sweet Home. Natasha Bure is, of course, a singer, songwriter, social media star. If you followed her on YouTube, you perhaps have seen her in Faith, Hope, and Love. Of course, one that I know my wife really enjoyed, Switched for Christmas, and some others. She also, of course, in addition to certainly being an actress, is also a singer, and you might remember her from being on The Voice in season 11. And Natasha, just great to have you here today on Point of View.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Let's, if we can, talk about your family, because quite a talented family indeed. And, of course, you've also had a chance to move, I believe, to Los Angeles. And in some respects, you're really trying to be sort of a Christian light in the midst of sometimes a fair amount of darkness in that region of the country. Tell us more, if you might.
Yeah, definitely. I live in LA, and it's a very crazy place to be. I'm kind of in the hub, in the center of all things entertainment, which is awesome. And kind of the career path that I wanted to choose, but also a very not always very bright world. It can be kind of dark and filled with just a lot of negativity. And I am just very inspired by a lot of the people who are choosing to, keep their faith at the forefront of their life and, make that as known as possible, even in the entertainment industry, which doesn't necessarily always welcome, these types of things.
And one of the reasons I like to do this from time to time is because I think we need to support those films that are faith-affirming and are certainly pro-family, pro-life, and this is certainly one of those. And it's a way to send a signal to Hollywood that we want more of those. So first of all, as people go to the website, pointofview.net, click on your picture there. It will take you to the website of Home Sweet Home. And then below that, we also have a trailer. So I'm just encouraging everybody to, when they have a moment, go to the trailer and click on it, because then you'll have a chance over about a 2-minute period to get a sense of the film that we're talking about. But let's talk about it for just a few minutes, because if nothing else, this is something which people can get on DVD, and there are a number of releases taking place. Of course, the theaters are closed down right now, but we can still watch it at home. And it really is a story in which you play, as I understand, a barista by the name of Victoria, kind of bored with life, and all of a sudden you find Jason, and you think, oh, well, I need to start flirting with him. But then as you start doing so, you find out that he is running a ministry that actually builds affordable housing and that kind of stuff. Then there's some kind of humorous scenes where you're trying to pick up a hammer, trying to be somebody that knows a little bit about construction work, and it gets kind of crazy from there. So tell us more, if you might.
Yeah, I mean, you explained it perfectly, but I play a character, Victoria, and she's very into herself. She's very self-centered, and she's kind of used to getting a lot of attention from, other guys and friends and people at the coffee shop that she works at. And she kind of just isn't really, I guess, fulfilled. And she's just kind of trying to find all this happiness through different outlets. And she meets, like you said, Jason, who runs a ministry that builds homes for people in need and people who, had just are less fortunate. And she kind of thinks that he's going to be like the rest of the guys that she usually dates, and she can get him so easy. And when she kind of realizes that his focus is his relationship with Christ and building this ministry and helping others, instead of just learning and growing as a person and, trying to know him, she kind of just basically forgets all of that and does her own thing, decides that she wants to fake her faith, and not only fake her faith, but she also pretends that she knows how to build a house and how to work in construction. And you'll see the story unfold. It's very cute, but she learns a lot about herself at the end that I think she wasn't necessarily expecting to, and it's a very sweet film.
Well, let's take a break and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. The reason I'm laughing is because she shows up on a construction site and looks more like she's going out on a date, or is like she's going to be a fashion model, than somebody that knows how to use a hammer or how to actually construct some of these affordable homes. So we'll come back and talk about that, because it really brings out a number of themes. First of all, the value of Christian service. Again, we have seen a number of Christians over the years, as well as other companies and organizations building affordable houses and reaching out. Also, this idea that some people just sort of fake Christianity. Are you really a Christian, or are you just pretending to be that, which is part of the theme of Victoria? And then, of course, also what it means in terms of kind of a character arc for this particular film. So just wanted you to know about that. And also, again, like I want to do from time to time, highlight somebody that is a Christian in Hollywood making a difference. And Natasha Bure is one of those individuals. So when we come back, we'll continue talking with her, and then we'll get on to some other very important issues. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about the need for economists and political leaders to create an endgame to the current lockdown on our society. The obvious objection to this can be found in the numerous cliches that portray any discussion as an attempt to trade dollars for death. The governor of New York, for example, scolds, "No one should be talking about social Darwinism for the sake of the stock market." He argues we will not put a dollar figure on human life. But even the editors of the New York Times recently described this as a false choice. Shelter in place has been necessary, but there must be a time in the future when government leaders must consider the economic and humanitarian trade-offs. Reopening American society isn't as much about the stock market as it is about the everyday lives of millions of Americans. Frankly, the wealthy will probably weather the current lockdown, but that is not true of the poor and even middle class who have no savings to rely on. As I mentioned yesterday, income is a strong predictor of health outcomes. People who are poor don't live as long. Americans who have lost wages and lost jobs are less likely to prosper. They won't eat as well, and they won't buy medications because they're simply trying to buy food and pay the rent. For the purist who argues that we should never talk about trade-offs, we can point to many current examples. Fewer people would die on highways if the speed limit was 25 miles per hour. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety found that highway fatalities rose 8.5% for every increase of 5 miles an hour. Cigarette smoking is responsible for 480,000 deaths per year, and 88,000 people die each year from alcohol-related causes. But we don't ban either of these. We make policy trade-offs every day. We need a national conversation about the cost and benefit of our current lockdown. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we are privileged to have with us for just a few more minutes Natasha Bure. And again, if you have seen her in some of the other films like Faith, Hope, and Love, Switch for Christmas, Make It or Break It, or this one, Home Sweet Home, coming out very shortly. And let's, if we can, for a minute, Natasha, before we get back into the theme of that movie, talk about how people can obtain this, because in some respects, with the theaters closed down, we're kind of going to a plan B. So how can individuals that are interested in this, that maybe have watched the trailer, say, that's something I'd like to have in my home, that's something I'd like to watch, how can they obtain that?
I believe it's on digital platforms, so you're able to stream it as well as DVD. But yeah, unfortunately, with the theatrical release, is postponed until, I guess, further notice due to COVID-19.
Yeah, again, it's just incredible. I understand you are going to have a premiere sometime. I think it was a Lakewood Church in Houston and some other places. But this has changed everything, not the least of which the life of an actress. And the production companies are all facing some of that as well. So just wanted to alert you to that. And as we know more, or we can provide you with some of those links when it comes out, we will certainly do so. But let's come back to the film for just a minute, because I think one of the things that it really emphasizes is that here you were saying, okay, I don't feel like I'm connecting with this boy, so I know I'm going to first research how to act like a Christian and also research how to build a house. But in some respects, that's a little bit humorous, but it relates very much to the fact that, you know, as you and I both know, there are a lot of people that just play at being Christians, and that's kind of one of the themes that runs through the film, isn't it? Maybe I lost her. Well, if I lost her, I guess I did. Okay, well, nothing else. We'll maybe end the interview. We'll go on to some others later on when we know a little bit more. But that is certainly just a little bit of why I wanted to cover the whole issue of Home Sweet Home. And again, if we can get her back in just a minute, I'll mention that we do have the trailer, and it is something you might want to watch. If nothing else, it I thought was very well done, and perhaps will give you an encouragement to go out there and find out some more about some of these other films. But let me just real quickly, while we're doing that, also mention that we have posted a couple of articles for you today on the website. And one of those, of course, I call it The Origin of the Virus. And that will be something we will be talking about in the next hour. And then we also have, of course, some of the unprecedented video that the president was showing and a variety of other topics that we will be addressing as well. Natasha, I think we have you back.
Yes, I'm back.
Yes. So talk about this idea of learning and trying to research what it's like to be a Christian. I thought that was kind of an interesting theme there as well, that she recognizes she doesn't fit in. So if she's going to fit in with this Christian crew, first of all, she's got to figure out how to act like a Christian. Second of all, learn how to build a house. And I don't think either of those went very well, did they?
No, they definitely didn't. And I think it's something that's very relatable, not necessarily to every single person of faking your faith or pretending to be a Christian. But I think at one time and another, I think, especially in my life, I know that there might have been a friend group or a specific person that I wanted to hang out with or be friends with, or, you know, there's that desire to be liked and to be appreciated. And sometimes you pretend to maybe have a certain interest, to have something in common with this person, and it you know, it stems from just, you know, I think just not being yourself, and that's what makes us us. And so I think there's something to be said for that, and I think it was beautiful that towards the end, I won't spoil the film in any way, but, you know, you see when she goes through different stages throughout the film. Initially, when she's researching on her computer, she's saying, you know, how to act like a Christian. And then you go towards the end of the film when she's researching something similar, the lingo changes, and you see her heart change because she's been really exposed to all these people who are living for Christ and do have a relationship with Christ. And it doesn't come, it's not about pretending anymore, but it's learning how to be a Christian and how to live that faith. And so I think that's something that's really, really cool.
And again, she runs into a single mom that kind of creates some of that issue. And again, you know, there is a philosophy that some people have said, fake it till you make it, but that's not true with Christianity. And so in some respects, this is sort of faith affirming. It's got a fair amount of humor in it, and it's got good production values. So again, I would encourage people to find out a little bit more. I've got kind of a list here of some of the platforms, but again, you could probably do the research and type in Home Sweet Home. And of course, the bottom line is the first click on the website there will actually take you to the information about that. And so you can order it if you would want to do so, put it on your platform, and you can learn out a little bit more. And we even have some pictures of behind the scenes and how it's actually filmed. And just before I let you go, one of the questions I always like to ask individuals that are working in film is what you might say to anyone else that might come behind you that says, you know, I think I have a message, and maybe I would like to eventually be a writer, a director, an actor, an actress. I might like to maybe just even go on a crew, and even if all I'm doing is helping with the sound or making sandwiches. How do you get started in films? Can you give some people some direction? And most importantly, what is it like to be a Christian in the film industry right now?
Well, for the first question of how to, you know, put yourself in films and writing and directing, and I've been really lucky, and I don't know anything different because I grew up in a house and a family that's always been in entertainment, and so I've always been given really good tips. And I think the biggest thing is just to say yes to all opportunities and really just go after and ask the questions, be a part of those different sort of classes that you can get in, and just do the work and be as experienced as you can be, and just put yourself out there, honestly. I mean, I have a majority of my friends who are, working actors or want to be screenwriters or directors or producers, and everyone here is just hustling and just trying to insert themselves in situations where they can build and grow and learn and pursue that career. And so that's kind of what I do, and it's, obviously, again, something that I've wanted for a super long time, and it's just, you just have to work, and you just really have to say yes to opportunities that scare you and do things that are out of your comfort zone. And it's awesome. And to your second question, which is how is it being a Christian in the entertainment industry? It's difficult. It's a fight every single day to make sure that you are representing Christ and that you find your identity in Him, but also be open to opportunities and do things that are, that are going to make you grow as a person. And sometimes the two of those don't really go together because, in the entertainment industry, a lot of the content necessarily isn't faith-based. And
That's right.
You have to choose the right projects for you, and you just have to make those decisions in your relationship with Christ and how those translate to your career choices and things like that. And I think the other thing that for me has been really important is to just surround myself with people that are encouraging to me and who build me up in my relationship with Christ and continue to just push me as a person. And that's kind of how I do it.
Well, again, well said. And again, know what you believe and know what you are or not going to do, because there will be a lot of pressures to conform. So, Natasha, thank you for being with us. And we certainly, again, have information about Home Sweet Home on our website, pointofview.net, information about you as well. And thank you for taking some time to join us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with our friend that has been talking about the alternative sometimes to the Boy Scouts, and that is Trail Life USA. But in this case, we're not even going to talk about that as much as we're going to talk about the fact that they have put together the first ever national backyard campout, which is really to encourage families to make memories. And because we're in lockdown, this will be taking place shortly, actually just in a few days, on April 17th. So we wanted to educate you about that. We have some great information that has been put out by Trail Life USA. And when we come back from the break, we're going to spend some time talking with Mark Hancock about this and how you and your family can be involved, maybe even how your church can promote it. And so we're going to talk with him about these issues, and you can find out more information as we always make available on the website pointofview.net. Of course, you can go to traillifeusa.com to find it as well. So when we come back, we'll talk about another great alternative, which we all have to consider given the fact we're still in lockdown. And then the next hour, we'll talk about what happens when we come out of lockdown and how we're going to do that. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, we're facing some unprecedented times right now because many of us are actually self-isolating, social distancing, shelter in place have been some phrases we've been using for some time. And so outward bound has sort of become homebound. And so that's why I wanted to once again come back to something I mentioned last week, this National Backyard Campout, which will be taking place April 17th. And I wanted to give you more specific information about that. And, of course, you have all sorts of information on our website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can also go to traillifeusa.com. Either way, we'll get you the same information. And to explain this, let's, if we can, go to the individual who, of course, is heading up as the executive officer of Trail Life USA, Mark Hancock, an individual that in the past has actually served as a youth and college pastor, associate pastor, homeless ministry director, global event director, and much more, but now is an individual that heads up Trail Life USA. So, Mark, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
We've enjoyed having you on many times before. Oftentimes talked about Trail Life as a very good alternative to Boy Scouts, but in this case, we are talking about something that anybody can and should participate in. If you've got children or grandchildren, camping out in the backyard. I've done this in the past. But also it is where there will be, in a sense, an opportunity to be part of a nationwide event. So talk about this first ever National Backyard Campout and what we are asking our listeners to do.
Well, this was birthed out of our troops, some ideas from the field. You know, we have about 840 troops in all 50 states across the country, and they had been meeting virtually so that the boys could continue to earn their badges and progress in the program. And they took it one step further, and they started to camp outside and connect virtually. And finally, they came to the home office and said, could we invite everybody to this? And so we've opened up to the entire country for every family in the country to join our trailmen. We have over 30,000 trailmen across the country, and we're inviting families to join us on April 17th. That's Friday night, and camp in your backyard. And if you're not able to camp in your backyard, set up a blanket for it in the living room. But we're encouraging families to kind of take that evening and say, we're going to break up this strange routine that we're in right now. We want to create something to look forward to and a new way for families to bond.
And some of us that do camp out or backpack, I remember with my kids, wanted to do it in the backyard first, see how it's going to go here, especially if they get scared. They can just go back in home and find the restroom and all the other kinds of things that you deal with. But this, certainly anybody could do it any time. But talk about what is significant about April 17th and how you will connect up with other people around the country.
Well, you know, we're dealing with this time of social distancing, and I don't really like that language because we shouldn't be distancing socially. We should be doing everything we can to connect socially. So, of course, we can camp out in our backyards anytime, but this idea of thousands of families across the country camping out on the same evening and connecting through our website at traillifeusa.com, where we'll have a live broadcast across country, hearing from different families in different backyards, sharing their experience. Families will be able to upload their photos and videos of their own camping experience, so their relatives across the country can check in and can see their backyard campout. You know, there's something about everybody gathering together, even though we can't do it physically, but all of us at the same time taking an opportunity to be outdoors and enjoy some family time in a little bit of a different setting than we're accustomed to.
Let's, if we can, talk about ideas, because some people might say, well, I don't have a tent, but we could probably put something up, or we could go maybe and figure out a way to order one or borrow one from a neighbor or something like that. But then you have, as I understand, and talk about this, suggestions for games, for activities, for recipes, for, outdoor cooking, and all sorts of things. So talk about what is available to some of our listeners if they go to the right websites.
Well, we have about 8,000 volunteers across the country who love the outdoors, and they're camping enthusiasts. And so they have been sending in, and we've been posting on the website all kinds of tips on what to do that evening, whether it's recipes for campfire recipes or activities that you can do outdoors, or suggestions on equipment or how to set up your backyard campsite. We have some vendors up there who are selling equipment at a discount for this event. I believe you could still get it shipped to your house in time. But the main idea, Kirby, is to have a good time. The last thing we want families to do is stress over the way that they're doing the backyard campout. Enjoy it. So whether it's just going outside in the backyard for a time and then, like you said, deciding that, well, I'm going to sleep in my own bed tonight, that's fine. Or setting up a blanket for it in the living room because maybe you're just not comfortable. You don't have the equipment. That's okay. The idea is to break this odd routine we're in, but perhaps introduce yourself to something new. And our volunteers are just thrilled about introducing folks to the outdoors.
Let's open up the phones in case you have some questions about this, or maybe you have already participated in a Trail Life USA event. So let's open up the phones, 800-351-1212, because we'll keep Mark with us a little bit longer to talk about some of these events and how to do this. And one of the things that you have talked about before in some of your books, Let Boys Be Boys and 5 Critical Needs of Boys. Again, this campout doesn't necessarily have to be just boys. It can be boys, girls, the entire family, everything from grandparents to parents to kids and everybody else. But you also have written about the fact that these kinds of events really are great memory-making kinds of events. And especially for our boys, if I can focus on them for just a minute, they need to have some of these kind of exciting adventure activities, whether this one will just be in their backyard or they get to go camping out somewhere else. And that's one of the reasons why Trail Life USA exists in the first place, isn't it?
Well, this is a historic time, and who knows how we're going to reflect back on this time. But I can tell you that there are a lot of families who will look back and think about job loss or uncertain times or shortages or those sorts of things, or the fear of the unknown. But what if our kids can look back and say, wow, that's when our family camped in the backyard. That's when we set up the huge fort in the living room using blankets and furniture. And their memory of it can be much different than ours. And so we're encouraging families to set that night aside for that reason. Now, boys in particular really need our attention right now. They're now twice as likely to be declared special education, 3 times more likely to be ADHD, suicide rates, crime rates, everything is just soaring for boys because they're in kind of an environment that doesn't recognize the unique strength of boys. They're kind of being painted with this broad brush of toxic masculinity. So we're encouraging, we're a boy-focused organization. We're unapologetically Christian, and we are boy-focused because we think that boys and girls need programs aimed specifically at them. So especially around times like a national backyard campout, this is the kind of stuff that wins the heart of a boy. And if you start young with them, with these types of creative opportunities to engage the boy in things that he's interested in, then you own his heart for life.
And, just recently we did the interview with the author of the book, Boy Crisis, one of the co-authors. And again, just once again, let me kind of underscore what you just said, that we really are kind of in a boy crisis right now. You can go back a few decades where most of the individuals in the university were boys and fewer were girls. Now it's almost completely reversed. Most of them are girls and not boys. When you look at whether it is depression, whether it is drug use or a variety of others, we really are facing a significant boy crisis, and we can sit there and lament that, or we can say this could be just a great opportunity on April 17th to create some memories that might last for a lifetime. And the good news is that you will certainly be encouraging people to post photos and videos, but whether people post them on your website at traillifeusa.com or not, they should be taking some pictures because, as you said, for some of these young people, it may really be one of the most significant events in a fairly traumatic time. I feel sorry for these kids that are not going to be able to go through graduation, not going to go to prom, not maybe even get to see their friends that they went to school with again before the end of this year, who have been stuck at home trying to do kind of online education. And if they look back and all they see this as is just a kind of a dark, dismal, fearful time, that's not going to be good. But instead, I think this is a positive alternative to this. So let's take a break. We come back. If you would like to join the conversation for a moment or two, 800-351-1212. And we're privileged to have with us Mark Hancock. And again, we have information on our website, pointofview.net, or you can simply go to traillifeusa.com. There's a whole section on the National Backyard Campout. And again, there are some great ideas about how to create some of those magical moments, how to create some great memories, what can be actually done, even some ideas for games and for activities and even outdoor cooking. Nothing else, got to make some s'mores, don't we? So those are all some things we're going to talk about in just a minute. But if you'd like to join us as we take a break, let's get an opportunity for you to ask a question or make some comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation with Mark Hancock right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The measure of a federal judge may be what he or she writes, or maybe that a judge writes. Judge James Ho of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit never seems to miss that chance, and his opinions are worth reading. Take, for instance, his separate opinion in Horvath versus City of Leander. While he mostly agreed with the majority's decision, he raised concerns that the lower court relied upon Employment Division versus Smith, a case often relied on to curtail the First Amendment's promise of the free exercise of religion. Well, that led him to articulating the importance of words, pushing back against efforts to reduce the promise of the free exercise clause to the mere freedom of worship. Properly understood, Judge Ho helpfully explains, the founders intended the First Amendment to extend beyond mere ritual and private belief to cover any action motivated by faith. Well, care for the text may even mean that we shed any reluctance to hold government officials personally accountable for violating someone's religious liberty. As Judge Ho reminds us, we ought instead to be concerned about government chilling the citizens, not the other way around. After all, the Constitution is meant to restrain government, not empower it. The point for Judge Ho is that in guarding the text of the First Amendment, we refuse efforts to redefine it into lesser terms while rejecting judicial additions to it. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We have a few more minutes. We have Mark Hancock with us, of course, with Trail Life USA. And let me just mention that, of course, you have different regulations in different states and even different cities where you might be located. So we certainly encourage you to respect those orders, the emergency regulations about social distancing and the rest. With family members. But if nothing else, this is just a great opportunity to make some memories, and Trail Life Life USA is a Christ-centered, boy-focused character, leadership, and adventure organization. But this can involve not only the boys and the girls, not only the fathers and the mothers, but even the grandparents. And so I would encourage you to consider what you might want to do on April 17th. And so, Mark, that leads to an obvious question. Some people say, well, do I need to sign up? Is there something I can do to connect up with this? So tell us what individuals listening to this now, maybe for the first time, and thinking about what they might want to do Friday night, what do they need to do before then?
Well, the benefit to signing up is you become connected to a community of people who are going to be meeting together that night. So you would be getting emails, information on when to watch the live broadcast going across country. It also makes you eligible for a bunch of prizes. We have a lot of camping equipment and all kinds of other things that have been donated for this cause that will be given away that night. So we do encourage people to register at traillifeusa.com under events. And so that's a benefit being registered there. Plus, it puts you a pin on a map. We have a map of the United States and shows the zip code of families that are participating all across the country. So of course, it isn't necessary to register, but if you really want to feel a part of that community, which is one of the things we're trying to create is this experience, and not just the family bonding, but also for us to feel not so socially distanced from each other, to feel connected, at least virtually, in our own backyards, then participating in that and doing the registration does put you on the email list, for announcements about the event this week.
And so again, you can go to traillifeusa.com. Then on the right-hand side, there's an events, and that will take you there. Or you can simply go to traillifeusa.com/backyard campout, either way. And there's a place where you can register and get some of the information. You can plant a flag. I already see flags all over the United States. But again, each one of these pins represent a zip code. So some of you in outlying areas can fill those in. And then you can begin to see the various other friends of the camp yard, backyard campout, I should say. And that is some of the gear, Samaritan's Purse, Manhood Journey, Heritage Girls, and a variety of others. And then all sorts of outdoor skills, all sorts of camp recipes and activities. And it's a free registration, so I want to encourage you to do that. And just before I let you go, any other comments about what people might want to begin to plan to do on this Friday night?
Well, we're going to have some stargazing that night. We're going to have different experts from across the country going to join us and help people to enjoy the outdoors. I would encourage people, if you're in your yard, to use your ears, use your eyes, use your nose, everything you can use, all your senses in the outdoors to just really enjoy that experience. And I believe some of our guests on Friday night will be talking about that also. So bring your cell phone, or maybe you want to run your laptop out to the tent so you can stay connected, or make your tent inside. But the idea is that we take this time to kind of break this strange routine we're in and find a new way for families to connect.
Just a creative idea, and I appreciate you coming up with that. And I certainly think very highly of what is being done right now at Trail Life USA. And again, you can go to traillifeusa.com, find some of the information, and we'll try to announce it again before Friday night so that you can begin planning for this. And as we find ourselves in lockdown, there's still some positive things we can do. Let's make some memories for our children and grandchildren. So, Mark, thank you as always for joining us here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kirby. Have a wonderful day.
We are going to take a break in just a minute, but let me give you kind of an advanced look at what we're going to talk about a little bit in the next hour. And that is, we're going to get back into, of course, the pandemic and some of the issues there. But many of you are starting to ask, I think, a very good question. And the president is starting to talk about this, and governors are starting to talk about how can we get America back on its feet? Now, a very good piece that came out that is in Town Hall, which we haven't posted. Maybe I'll post it tomorrow, but it's by Daryl Scott, who's been on the program with us before, now currently the pastor of New Spirit Revival Center, but also, of course, an individual we've known for many years, as well as, interestingly enough, part of the National Diversity Coalition for Trump. It also has Kareem Lanier, and also Tim Dunn. Tim Dunn actually is the chairman of the board of directors for Empower Texans and Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. But nevertheless, this is kind of an open letter to the President of the United States. and really calling for us as a nation to share the burden, but at the same time recognize that we are an exceptional nation, and so we need to begin to lead and begin to think creatively about what are the next steps to get America back on her feet. Now, the interesting part of that is those individuals, I certainly know a good number of them would be on the Republican side of the aisle. But interesting enough, on the Democratic side of the aisle, I've seen something very creative that is done as well. And that is you have a number of governors in the Northeast states, led by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, but also governors in New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Delaware, that are putting together a committee of these 6 Northeast states aimed at reopening the economy, recognizing that they don't want to sacrifice the gains that have been made, but also recognize that we need to get America back on its feet. Now, I thought that this was very creative, number one, because there is going to be a call by the president to do some things, but if there's anybody that can understand what you can do in your individual state, it's going to be the governor. A one-size-fits-all probably isn't necessarily going to work for the sequential steps necessary to get America back on its feet. So I think this idea, which was put together by these 6 Northeast states, I do hear now also that the governors of California, Washington, and Oregon also are talking about maybe a strategy to cooperate in reopening their economies. And in both cases, whether we're talking about these governors in the Northeast or the governors in the West, are Democrat governors. And you would think, well, then they probably wouldn't be as criticized as, say, Donald Trump would be by the media. And you would be wrong. As I said in my commentary yesterday, even some of the ideas that I put forward by Thomas Friedman and a variety of others are put forward by people that are hardly pro-Trump individuals, but I just know that as soon as the president or any governor begins to take those steps, it leads to my commentary today that people say, well, you're actually trading dollars for deaths, deaths for dollars, however you want to say that. And I don't think that is the case. I think we can get America back to work without causing people to lose their lives. But I think one of the geniuses about this committee that is being formed, at least in the Northeast, by these Democrat governors, is it provides a little bit of political cover and might help fend off some of the inevitable criticism that is going to take place. So if you have not read my commentaries on Monday and Tuesday, yesterday and today, I would encourage you to do so, because the one yesterday really was an attempt to address some of those questions about how indeed we could come back to some kind of if you will, end game or exit strategy. The one today is entitled Dollars versus Death, because it tries to answer the question, well, we shouldn't ever make trade-offs. You have the purists that say we should never make trade-offs. Well, we do it all the time. When it's whether it's the speed limit or whether it's drug use or whether cigarettes should be allowed to be illegal. I go into this in some detail. So I'm really just helping you think through this issue, and most importantly, talking about what it will mean to get America back on its feet. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so in the next hour, but let's take a break, and we'll come back and talk more about some of these policies that need to be implemented on this pandemic. All that coming up right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time kind of looking once again at this pandemic. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The first hour, I did spend just a little bit of time before we took a break talking about getting America back to work, getting America back on its feet. And I'd love to hear from you. We'll open up the phones, 800-351-1212. Are you ready to get back to work? I would imagine some of you are. Some of you are maybe have been sequestered long enough that you're starting to feel like the walls are closing in on you, and we are going to be talking about that as well. I know we have Pastor Jack Graham with us. We also have Michael Perrone with us. I guess it's actually next Monday. We'll be talking about some of the concerns about some of these psychological issues and social issues as well, whether it's depression or loneliness. Matter of fact, that's my next booklet that's going out to those of you that are significant donors, because we believe that these are issues to address as well. So those are some topics. And even as one of our callers off the air was saying, reach out to individuals that you know that might be living alone. I have a Sunday school class, and we get together by Zoom. And I am struck by the fact that some of these single women living by themselves, some of them working in healthcare, are really very isolated. And so sometimes the best opportunity to interact with us is on a Zoom call, or to meet as we have done on a parking lot, where you can actually still be away from each other, but actually have something that looks like social contact. So those are some topics that we will be addressing here on Point of View as well. And so if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Phones are already ringing. We'll get to those in just a minute. But my first article, which I wanted to talk about for just a minute, is to clear up some of the misconceptions about the origin of this virus. Now, there have been a lot of conspiracy theories, and I'm not going to try to track down each one of those. That's more trouble than it's worth, I would say. But there is this very good piece by Fred Lucas. Could COVID-19 have come from a Chinese lab? 4 things you need to know. And it kind of takes us back to something when we only knew a little bit. And we did recognize that this market, this seafood market, is only about 300 yards from a level 4 containment facility in China. But now we know a lot more than we did even a couple of weeks ago. And so the speculation has led to a little more confirmation now. And so here's his 4 points real quickly, and then we'll take some phone calls. Number 1, was not a biological weapon. No one really thought that it was engineered for that, although some had speculated that maybe there was an attempt to create some kind of biological weapon that was accidentally released before it was confirmed. But if nothing else now, we can honestly see from some of the research at Scripps, for example, said, quote, if someone were seeking to engineer a new coronavirus as a pathogen, they would have constructed it from the backbone of a virus known to cause illness. But the scientists found that the SARS-CoV-2 backbone, that's the actual name for the virus, differed substantially from those of already known coronaviruses and almost mostly resembled related viruses found in bats and pangolins. Then you have the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research saying there's no evidence whatsoever that it is a bioweapon or that it was accidentally released from the Wuhan lab. Today, with the genetics we have on viruses and how we do testing, we can almost date them like carbon testing or radiocarbon. So that was, I think, an interesting look. So number 1, not a bioweapon. Number 2, did it come from the seafood market? Even at the time, I think I pointed out the fact that, yes, we did have individuals who had been at the market that contracted the virus, but you had others that did not. And David Ignatius, writing for the Washington Post, said the prevailing wisdom that the virus was spread by people who ate contaminated animals at the seafood market is shaky. You have one professor at Rutgers saying it is absolutely clear the market had no connection with the origin of the outbreak virus and instead only was involved in the amplification of the outbreak that had started elsewhere a full month earlier. So now people are saying, yes, many of them did come from the seafood market, but that's maybe where it was being spread. It doesn't take us back to what you might call patient zero. And then number three, would it possibly have been accidentally caught in lab and spread? Again, because the market is only about 300 yards from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And so it's a possibility, but there were, as many people, again, that professor from Rutgers said, there were no signatures of human manipulation. And then the fourth point is, was China driving suspicions? Yes, it was. And this misinformation was coming from a number of places, in particular China, suggesting that maybe this was from the U.S. Army planting the virus in Wuhan. No, it wasn't. Senator Tom Cotton, our senator from Arkansas, who I have a commentary coming about later this week, was one of the first members to actually raise alarms about the coronavirus. And even in January, had 8 different Chinese doctors, including Dr. Li Weiliang, who actually warned about this, but again, they were later condemned for making false statements. And, of course, then very quickly you saw that the Wuhan Municipal Health Commission stopped releasing daily updates on their COVID-19 cases. Government began to shift the message, raising questions as to whether or not the virus even came from China. And then, unfortunately, we have the World Health Organization parroting much of these propaganda points from China. And now the Trump administration even questioning whether they want to continue funding the World Health Organization. So those are just a couple of things from the first article that we've posted. But let me take some phone calls here. And we'll go to Sharon in New Mexico, KYCC. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I just am astounded that you are bringing up all these different issues. And I thank you for that, because the only truth I've been able to extract is from the USA Today newspaper, an article that was brought out on March the 20th. But rather than get into all of that, I'm just very concerned about school children getting back to school.
Yes.
And I know we are blessed here in New Mexico to have warm, sunny days. We have a warm, sunny day today. And I'm encouraging our governor to send our children back to school, say just right after the 4th of July. And we go to school July, August, September, October, let out for November, and don't come back until after Christmas.
Interesting idea. And I know that some people are certainly saying that even though there's been an attempt to try to do some homeschooling, a lot of it has become kind of home fooling, you know that. And I'm just wondering the impact that this is having, not only, of course, in America, but in schools around the world. And that's an idea of starting school much earlier and trying to make up some of the lost time. So very good point. I appreciate you calling. I need to take one of those mandatory breaks, but when we come back, we'd love to hear from some of you as well. What do you think about starting school earlier? Are you concerned about that? I certainly feel sorry for a lot of these kids, that especially that are seniors, that will not have a graduation ceremony, probably will certainly miss out on everything from prom to senior trips and all sorts of things. But I'd love to know your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212. Have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about the need for economists and political leaders to create an endgame to the current lockdown on our society. The obvious objection to this can be found in the numerous cliches that portray any discussion as an attempt to trade dollars for death. The governor of New York, for example, scolds, "No one should be talking about social Darwinism for the sake of the stock market." He argues we will not put a dollar figure on human life. But even the editors of the New York Times recently described this as a false choice. Shelter in place has been necessary, but there must be a time in the future when government leaders must consider the economic and humanitarian trade-offs. Reopening American society isn't as much about the stock market as it is about the everyday lives of millions of Americans. Frankly, the wealthy will probably weather the current lockdown, but that is not true of the poor and even middle class who have no savings to rely on. As I mentioned yesterday, income is a strong predictor of health outcomes. People who are poor don't live as long. Americans who have lost wages and lost jobs are less likely to prosper. They won't eat as well, and they won't buy medications because they're simply trying to buy food and pay the rent. For the purist who argues that we should never talk about trade-offs, we can point to many current examples. Fewer people would die on highways if the speed limit was 25 miles per hour. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety found that highway fatalities rose 8.5% for every increase of 5 miles an hour. Cigarette smoking is responsible for 480,000 deaths per year, and 88,000 people die each year from alcohol-related causes. But we don't ban either of these. We make policy trade-offs every day. We need a national conversation about the cost and benefit of our current lockdown. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Texas, KAVX. Steve, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Hey, Kirby. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for calling.
Thanks for having me. I'm just curious. I live in East Texas, and there's not a whole lot of just the panic as far as people being quarantined and having to not go to work. Everybody's basically doing business as usual. There's teachers are out, because of the school closing, things of that nature. But I work at a grocery store, and I see everybody every day, pretty much, except for some of the elderly. So I'm just curious. I don't see the impact here. I'm just wondering how much of the actual impact is reality from the news that we see every day, and how much is this fake news.
Yeah. Well, and first of all, let's, before we get to the fake news, because I will get to that, that sort of surfaced yesterday in the press conference with the president, but let's talk about the first issue, and that is in a couple of weeks ago, I may be off today, but a couple of weeks ago for sure, I think it was, half of the counties in the state of Texas did not have one individual who at least had tested positive for COVID-19. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't some that had it. And even back then, a third of the counties in the country did not. So just to help you to even say, even before, quote, fake news or somebody extrapolating, imagine if you lived in New York City it would look like a war zone because that was one of those hot spots. Let me move from there to maybe New Orleans. We have listeners in Louisiana. If you were right down there, that would be the case. And again, you start seeing different changes. I have listeners, of course, a lot of listeners in California. And the difference between Los Angeles and San Francisco is really striking. And really the difference between Los Angeles and, say, the Central Valley or the Sierra Nevada. So part of that has to do that indeed there are differences in terms of the geographically locality. Now, that being said, back to your key point, are some people over-extrapolating this for whatever reason, for political reasons, to say, well, this is an example of the failure of the Trump administration? Maybe. And we're going to talk about in just a minute what's been happening in Michigan, because the governor there, Gretchen Whitmer, has been taking probably some of the strongest statements on some of these issues. And that's why, for those of you up in Michigan, some of our listeners in Michigan, tomorrow they're saying under this, what do they call it, Operation Gridlock, that they expect almost 15,000 cars and trucks to descend on Michigan State Capitol to call attention to some of the things that the governor Whitmer has actually called for. The organizer of the protest said that quarantine is when you restrict movement of sick people. Tyranny is when you restrict the movement of healthy people. And so that is certainly one example of what I've been sort of talking about. We're kind of, for those of you watching online, getting back to my little booklet on the subject of civil disobedience. There are going to be a number of examples of civil disobedience. And so, in some respects, Steve, to answer your question, maybe in a long way, it sort of depends where you live. You're in East Texas, maybe you're in West Texas. You're probably seeing less of it than people are seeing it in some of the major cities. So I appreciate you calling, but it sounds like you guys are not facing the kind of pandemic that the rest of the country is facing, right?
No, sir, not at all.
Well, I appreciate you calling in. And if you would like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. I'm going to get into this in just a minute because it's a very good piece by William Davis, How the Coronavirus is Infecting America's Civil Liberties. And I've been hoping we might, in the next couple of days, get Rick Green on. He's got a great piece called Stop Quarantining the Constitution. Well, let's take another phone call real quickly. In Georgia, WLPT. Bob, thank you for calling today.
How you doing, Kirby?
I'm good. What's up?
Good. I just wanted to say, I believe wholeheartedly that this was absolutely a biological attack. All the evidence points towards it. And the mitigating circumstances, like how was China doing with their economy before we decided to take away their unfair advantage, and then so we took away their unfair advantage, and now the economy is sinking and or sunk, and
let's hope it's not sunk. Yeah, but back to your point, whether they tried to do it or they just got lucky, that is probably, if they sat down and said, is there a way that we can really kind of devastate most of the developed world actually and put us in a better position than we were a couple of months ago, whether that was intentional or accidental, I'll be the first to admit that this has worked out very well for them. And, of course, there are some people that are still making the case. I think I'd heard Rush Limbaugh the other day say, now, how's the Chinese stock market doing? Pretty well. Have you seen any other kind of quarantining taking place in China? Well, maybe not. And so in some respects, it has been a benefit to China. And it has been devastating, obviously, not just for our economy, although we tend to focus on the American economy over those others. And a lot of it has been certainly used by, as we talked about yesterday, various leaders to strengthen their control over their people. So China has great control over its people. We mentioned yesterday what is happening even in European countries and in Asian countries and South American countries, where oftentimes those leaders are able to exert a level of authority. And this piece that I have here by William Davis is just another great example, because he starts out by saying, as tens of millions of Americans have been placed under quarantine due to the coronavirus pandemic, so also has the U.S. Constitution. In other words, we put the Constitution under quarantine. And it's reminiscent of Benjamin Franklin's famous statement, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And this goes through in quite a bit of detail various individuals. Since we're coming to a break, let me just pick out a few. Governor of Kentucky warned people in his state that he would have police take pictures of their license plates and force them to quarantine for 14 days. But in that particular case, U.S. District Court Judge Justin Walker issued a ruling saying that drive-through services should be allowed in the state. In Mississippi, of course, we talked about this, and this is a case that Kelly Shackelford and First Liberty took with Pastor Hamilton at the King James Bible Baptist Church, in which you even had police officers saying your rights have been suspended by the government. But again, they had an injunction that was issued over the weekend, and matter of fact, there's oral arguments, I believe, in court today, so Kelly will give us more of an update on that in a few days. Let's go to Kansas. You know, the governor there forced churches to close for Easter. The New York City mayor, Bill de Blasio, threatened to close churches and synagogues, permanently, if they resist his shutdown orders. And so those are just examples of religious liberty, but this is also just about civil liberties, because he gives you examples of a Pennsylvania woman fined $1,000 for driving alone, a 12-year-old girl in Arkansas playing basketball. They confiscated the hoop. Of course, California man, we've talked about this before, on the beach, by himself, by the way, but chased down by the police and carried away in handcuffs. But the one that's getting the most attention for our listeners in the state of Michigan right now is Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who many people say may be doing some of this just to get the attention. Matter of fact, Ted Goodman, who is a Republican operative there in Michigan, said she's using this crisis to boost her name ID nationally at the expense of liberty and freedom from people in Michigan. And he says, people in the state are willing to make sacrifices to keep themselves and their neighbors safe, but they're not going to allow their fundamental rights to be trampled over her personal political ambitions. But nevertheless, she's seen as a potential candidate for vice president. And as I pointed out, there will be quite the gridlock tomorrow at the state capital of Michigan. And when we come back, I want to talk about some other examples of, if you will, civil protest. For those of you in the state of Ohio, you may be familiar with that one. But for our other listeners, we'll talk about a couple of other people that are starting to push back against some of these restrictions. And so we'll see where that takes us. And then we'll get into a couple of other very important issues. But if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some more phone calls in just a few minutes. And if you find yourself wanting to read some of these articles that I'm quoting from, you'll find those at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Or you can sit back and listen, and we're going to get into more of these issues. But we are seeing a fair amount of evidence of civil disobedience. This is the booklet I wrote recently because I thought it would be appropriate in light of all the things that are happening with, of course, sanctuary cities and sanctuary cities for immigration, sanctuary cities for gun control, and a variety of others. But now we're starting to see there's a bit of a pushback on this. One of the people that's been following this is an individual we've had on this program, Alex Berenson. He is a former writer for the New York Times. You might remember the last time we had him on, it was actually on the subject of marijuana. And that is, he has said the same thing I've said for years. He's not really a medical researcher, but he was struck by the fact that at a time when we're learning so much more about some of the dangers of using marijuana, are the time in which so many states are decriminalizing some of those activities and even making them readily available. And, of course, you might remember some of the controversial statements he made, too, about some of the psychological problems, which when he was talking to his wife, who works as a counselor, said, well, of course that's the case. And he goes, what do you mean, of course that's the case? Well, people aren't recording it or reporting it, so he's been doing that. But more recently, he's been focused on the whole issue of the pandemic as a researcher, looking, of course, first of all, at some of these flawed models, which we've pointed out before were based upon inaccurate information, and then also has been drawing attention to some of these protests. Of course, we can mention the one in Michigan again in just a minute, also in North Carolina and some of the others. Matter of fact, you said, as someone wrote me, people in Michigan know when you lose jobs, they don't come back. And at a time when unemployment is already, about 16.8 million Americans have lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks. That means about 1 in 10 working Americans right now is out of a job. And so that is certainly an issue. But again, for our listeners in Ohio, you may be familiar with this, but let's educate the rest of the country here. Last Thursday had dozens of protesters that showed up in Columbus, Ohio, and they were wearing some of these Guy Fawkes masks. You might remember that from the movie, in which they were wearing the mask, holding signs that said things like "Open Ohio," "Quarantine worse than the virus," "Social distancing or social conditioning, we do not consent." So we're starting to see a bit of a pushback there. There's also a Facebook group called Reopen North Carolina. I can go through this long list. And again, since we broadcast in over 40 different states, I won't go into all the details, but you will find good examples of that, in which some people are just simply saying, wait a minute, we're really starting to be a little bit concerned about how some of these mayors, some of these governors have made such extreme statements and have orders that go far beyond what is necessary. But our friends at the Wall Street Journal point out something else, and that is some of this may just be the need for some level of discernment and discretion on the part of law enforcement. They said Americans, by and large, have willingly obeyed the government's shelter-in-place and social distancing orders, but that doesn't seem to be enough for some public officials. They're indulging their inner bully in ways that over time will erode public support for behavior that can reduce the spread of the coronavirus. One problem, they say, is excessive enforcement. Some state and local officials tasked with implementing shelter-at-home orders appear either to misunderstand the edicts they are meant to carry out or suffer from a lack of discernment. And here they use a different example. I got so many examples, after a while I've run out of them. This one comes from Colorado, where police officers handcuffed a man who actually was with his 6-year-old daughter. I guess I did cover that one. I take that back, where they were on an empty softball field. And then he does give a couple other stories, which I had not reported here. In public parks in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, police officers are prohibiting locals from even sitting on park benches, even if they're alone. In Philadelphia, police officers dragged a man from a public bus. I think we mentioned that briefly a couple of days ago for not wearing a mask. But nevertheless, that one I think they were apologizing for. And, of course, the most extreme example, no surprise again, those of you in Michigan must be really proud right now because Governor Gretchen Whitmer is getting hit there. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that she has not only shut down what are called non-essential businesses, but also roped off non-essential products, even in some of these stores. And so as a result, there has been kind of a pushback, as most likely we're going to hear about tomorrow. Because you can maybe go out and buy a bag of candy, you can buy a lottery ticket, you can get some alcohol, but you can't get a pack of seeds or a can of paint. So obviously there is some confusion in that regard. So part of this has to do with the way it's being enforced by the police. But I thought I'd bring one other one to the table real quickly, and that is to point out that Seton Motley, in a piece that came out recently in Red State, points out that, I was kind of reading through, he says, George Orwell's 1984, Big Brother. And he said it didn't seem right because he said Orwell's government was extraordinarily competent in its totalitarian imposition of technological power. But he said in reality, no government in the history of man has ever been even remotely close to that competent. For Orwell's Big Brother dystopia to become reality, he said, big government would need help from the private sector. Enter big tech, which relates to another one of my commentaries and also one of my booklets on social media, because we talk about how already big tech, the various technological companies have been able to, in some respects, censor certain kinds of ideas. But the big tech that's now being used by China and even governments in this country and in Europe are those which are now starting to use cell phone data, drones, surveillance cameras, and a variety of others. So in some respects, I would suggest that maybe one of the biggest threats is not just big government, although these edicts sometimes go far beyond the pale, but big government matched with big tech. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that in the next couple of weeks as well. Just before I take a break, though, I thought one of the things I want to pass on to you, and I've got a commentary coming out next week that gets into this in more detail, is the need for us to exercise some level of discernment or even logic. And the problem with this is that when we're dealing with a lot of this information coming from medical experts, coming from doctors, coming from healthcare experts, we kind of go, well, I don't know much about medicine, so I'll just have to trust them. But the reality is, if you just use a little discernment or some logic, you are going to all of a sudden see some of the flaws in some of the things that are said. A classic example is one we've talked about here for the last couple of weeks, and that has to do with masks. You know as well as I how many times I've quoted some of these statistics that, or some of these phrases that we're saying, masks aren't going to be very helpful to you. Just leave the mask for the professionals, which seemed at the time to imply that if you get your paycheck from a clinic or a hospital, then the mask works. But if you use a mask, well, it probably won't work because either you won't know how to put it on or it really won't give you any protection. And, of course, we know all of that turned out to be completely misrepresented. Well, one of the things that Dennis Prager points out here is that if you just use some logic or common sense, you'll begin to see some of the claims that are being made right now. And the claim that I'll talk about after the break is the claim that the reason we actually have a flattening of the curve is due almost exclusively to these lockdowns. But what I'm going to point out when we come back from the break is that if that's the case, then you can't explain the anomalies. Let me pick one. For our listeners in Nebraska, you know only so well that Nebraska never locked down. Originally, we're about 10 states. Now I think we're down to 8, maybe even 6. I've lost track over time. One of the states that has never had a lockdown is the state of Nebraska, which has caused the Democrats in the legislature to criticize the Republican governor almost incessantly. Yet Nebraska, which never locked down the state, has a death rate of less than 1 per 100,000, probably one of the lowest death rates in the country. And so if lockdown's what did it, why is that one so low? But when we come back, I'm going to play off a little bit more. What's the difference between New York and California and the argument being made there? And then how do you relate to New York, California, and Florida, some of the largest states here? And we will see very quickly that if you use just a little bit of logic, you'll say some of these comments being made just don't stand up to scrutiny. Now, I recognize that most reporters don't have a science background, but hopefully they know a little bit about logic, and we'll talk about how Dennis Prager has pointed out some of those logical flaws right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The measure of a federal judge may be what he or she writes, or maybe that a judge writes. Judge James Ho of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit never seems to miss that chance, and his opinions are worth reading. Take, for instance, his separate opinion in Horvath versus City of Leander. While he mostly agreed with the majority's decision, he raised concerns that the lower court relied upon Employment Division versus Smith, a case often relied on to curtail the First Amendment's promise of the free exercise of religion. Well, that led him to articulating the importance of words, pushing back against efforts to reduce the promise of the free exercise clause to the mere freedom of worship. Properly understood, Judge Ho helpfully explains, the founders intended the First Amendment to extend beyond mere ritual and private belief to cover any action motivated by faith. Well, care for the text may even mean that we shed any reluctance to hold government officials personally accountable for violating someone's religious liberty. As Judge Ho reminds us, we ought instead to be concerned about government chilling the citizens, not the other way around. After all, the Constitution is meant to restrain government, not empower it. The point for Judge Ho is that in guarding the text of the First Amendment, we refuse efforts to redefine it into lesser terms while rejecting judicial additions to it. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes. Let's see if we can use some logic and maybe a little bit of discernment, because one of the things I want to pass on to you as listeners to Point of View, and as you consume media, you watch television, you read the newspaper, you go out on the internet websites, even as you listen to this program, use some discernment, use some logic. And Dennis Prager really takes on this question, has the lockdown worked? Now, he, to start with, seems to be pretty skeptical about that, but Bore, to the point, because he took the time to dig up the numbers, which I'm going to go through very quickly, I think you can see that anybody that claims that the reason we might be bending the curve now is due almost exclusively to lockdown has to ignore a lot of facts and a lot of data. Let's take one of those. France's death rate, 229 per million, which is 3 times higher than in the United States. Okay, France went into lockdown March 17th. Now, the trouble with trying to compare that to the United States is difficult because, after all, the decision was made by different states. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, a few states never went into lockdown. So let's compare it to California. And Dennis Prager lives in California. A lot of our listeners right now are in California, which is the most populous state in the country, and so is closest to the population of France. So again, France went into lockdown March 17th. California went into lockdown March 19th, just 2 days after. But the death rate from the virus in California is 2 per 100,000, which is so very different than what you have in France. So that means, he says, France went on lockdown only 2 days prior to California, but has 10 times the death rate. So do you think the lockdown made a difference? Well, maybe a little bit, but hardly enough to explain a 10-fold difference in terms of the death rate. I mentioned, of course, Nebraska, and he gets into that one as well, so we'll ignore that. But then goes and talks about a comparison that was made between New York and California. And this comes, interesting enough, from an article that appeared in the Los Angeles Times. And it was an article that was quoting some of the research done by a professor who's at the University of California at Berkeley, a biostatistician. And he tried to explain why California had so many fewer deaths than New York, because he argues that just putting these controls in place a single day earlier makes a huge, huge difference in the growth rates. So, again, the argument is that the California governor, Gavin Newsom, had the lockdown order on March 19th, whereas the governor of New York, that would be Andrew Cuomo, waited 3 more days to lock down New York State. And so the differences of a day or 2, or in this case 3 days, was all the difference between the fact that you have many more deaths recorded in New York than you do in California. You got that? Okay, Dennis Prager then goes on to say the article then completely undermines its entire thesis by the next statement. It says Florida Governor Ron DeSantis didn't impose a stay-at-home order till April 1st. And he says apparently it never occurred to the Los Angeles Times authors to even look up Florida's death rate. He points out that some of the liberal media have been almost worthless during this crisis, because if a few days delay in ordering a lockdown of a state or a country makes a huge, huge difference, which is the direct quote from that professor at UC Berkeley, biostatistician, in death rates, then Florida should have a worse death rate than New York, let alone California. Yet Florida's death rate is among the lowest in the country, 24 per million, despite the fact that Florida, along with Maine, has the largest percentage of elderly people, those 65 years of age and older, of any American state. So the point he's making is that even in the article, if you just read long enough, you go, wait a minute. If indeed that is the case, and because California had the lockdown first, then New York, and then Florida should be off the charts because it's not locking down on March 19th. It's not actually closing down even March 22nd. It's closing down April 1st. And so you can see that this constant drumbeat that the lockdown is working maybe isn't necessarily always verified by the data. Lest you need one more example, Dennis Prager goes on to that one as well and says, well, then there's Sweden, the one industrialized Western democracy that did not shut down, engendering all sorts of intense anger from scientists and other experts as well as the left-wing media. Sweden, which still has its restaurants and businesses open, is far below Spain, Italy, Belgium, France, the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, all which had national lockdowns in terms of death per million. And then he acknowledges that Sweden's death rate is higher than its Scandinavian neighbors, which is something that the press did point out. For the longest time, I didn't even know that Sweden was not locked down, because it was not locked down, but it also just didn't have any kind of significant death rate. Only when it started to climb up a little bit did you now have people starting to at least report it here in this country. But nevertheless, in the past few days, he points out, Sweden, which has almost the same number of people as Denmark and Norway combined, lost 20 of its citizens, while its neighbors lost 18. So the bottom line is that we're not necessarily arguing against a lockdown, but we are arguing against the idea that the lockdown is some kind of silver bullet, some kind of magic wand. And all you have to do is use just a little bit of logic and discernment to find that out. Finally, of course, the last article I've posted here points you to the piece that the president ran yesterday in his press conference. It's kind of a supercut video in which he includes some clips from MSNBC, various and CNN pundits sort of downplaying the coronavirus, which, by the way, as soon as it started running, CNN and MSNBC cut away from what was called later a propaganda video. And then you have some statements by one of the columnists for the New York Times talking about the benefit of the travel ban. And then you have some quotes from some of the people I just mentioned, Governor Cuomo, Governor Newsom, Governor Santos, a variety of others, Governor of New Jersey, a variety of others talking about and praising the administration's response. And so that led to an outcry, first of all, from ABC's John Carl, accusing the president of using government resources to create what he called a campaign video, although he also called it, if you will, some kind of, I guess he had some different kinds of words like propaganda video and the rest, and wanted to know who actually produced this. And then, of course, you had this incredible conflict between the president and ABC's Jonathan Carl, as well as CBS reporter and a number of others. And, of course, it's gotten just kind of out of hand now in terms of these press briefings. Wall Street Journal has suggested maybe, Mr. President, you should just answer one or two questions, turn it over to the experts, and that's not going to happen. And I suspect, if nothing else, probably more people are going to be watching today because of the blow-up that took place yesterday. Probably one of the worst press conferences I've ever seen on both sides. It was enough blame to go around, and if you have not seen the video that started this, you can certainly read the article we have there and watch it. And if not, I'm sure that will be a viral video that will be showing up on your Twitter feed or your Facebook page, and a variety of other topics we will probably have to cover tomorrow because we are simply out of time. So if you would like to know a little bit more about some of the things we've been talking about today, they can be found on the website, pointofview.net. Tomorrow we'll get back into some other stories that I think you will find interesting. We'll try to give you the best facts and figures we can dig up for, but most importantly, as Dennis Prager suggested, use some discernment. Use a little bit of logic. Maybe you'll see some of the flaws, and you don't even need a medical degree to find it. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.